Today, we talk about Kenyan politics. We talk about patriotism and nationalism. We talk about peaceful elections. We talk about traditional versus cultured. Welcome back. There we go. Hello. Ooh.
Yes, I had questions about because we've talked about like heritage related subjects
Yeah.
in usually within the context of the classes that we took. But I don't think I ever, besides actually seeing your thesis presentation,
Yeah.
I haven't at all really interacted with or studied or looked at heritage in Kenya, and I'm just curious,
Yeah.
asking someone from there what exactly is the deal with heritage, world heritage, whatever, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
In Kenya on the government level, like how are they protecting it? How is it managed?
So heritage at the Kenyan level, let's say, first of all, it's I mentioned a bit of it last week in the part that we cut off. It's tied a lot to the foreign exchange aspect of heritage and how it can be used to make money. So the government is most active in the Kenya Wildlife Service.
Okay.
Because we have a number of national parks, relatively prestigious. And we have the big five: the lion, the buffalo, leopard, rhino. I've forgotten one of them. Lion, rhino, buffalo, leopard, and something. So in 1977, before 1977, hunting was legal in Kenya. And there was this campaign, I believe it was global, not just from Kenya, about placing a ban on hunting and the trade of ivory and animal trophies. So from then on, around that time, the government established a parastatal. That's an arm of the government that's run not strictly as government, but to generate some money.
Okay.
So it's on the border of public and privately owned. So that's a Kenya Wildlife Service, and around that time there was a tagline of "shoot animals with your cameras and not with rifles."
That's nice.
So a big part of our national heritage, so to say, is based on wildlife. Then on the cultural side of it, before I go to the cultural side of it, there's also a bit of historical heritage sites.
Okay, so when you say historical as opposed to cultural, you mean historical sites in terms of something that is not within the past 100 years, while cultural is within the past 100 years.
First of all, Kenyan culture is a confusing and controversial subject for me. I'll explain why in a moment. So most of the historical stuff is from beyond a century, and I avoid using the word cultural because some of the sites they are known. There's two ruins. There's a place called Gede, Gede ruins. It's along the coast, and this was a society that they had. It was a whole city built out of stone, and from what archaeologists find out, it's that they lived in. They were really flourishing. Then they just disappeared. Nobody knows what happened to them. But their standard of living was relatively advanced because it was there's no mention of these communities by the Arabs or the British, and the Arabs came before the British. There was a whole sultanate along the Kenyan coast, what is now the Kenyan coast, Kenyan, Tanzania, and all the way down to Mozambique. There were different sultans controlling that place, and part of our history, since within the African style of history was normally carried orally, but the Arabs had already developed writing. So part of the historical accounts were recorded by the Arabs, like even details about Vasco da Gama's journeys. Those were recorded by the Arabs from Oman. But the people from Gede, these ruins, they're marvelous and they exist, and they're mysterious because nobody knows who exactly they were. So that's an example of historical heritage. There's another one that recently got UNESCO World Heritage status. It's called Kitmikai, Kitmikai. It was more of a fortified village. I think they got it got inscribed this year or last year. I think last year they had a function, and I just saw it on Twitter. I was disappointed in myself, having not known about the nomination process, and I just saw on Twitter that it had been inscribed and they were celebrating it. So there's I don't know if it's sad to say or it's just a fact of it. Most of the historical sites that we have are either from unknown communities or at least the ones that have some sort of governmental protection. They're either from unknown people, unknown communities, or they were colonial structures, such that again along the coast there's the Fort Jesus. It was built by the Portuguese in the 15th century.
Yeah, I would say something like Fort Jesus would not be something that's very Maasai. So
yeah, it was Portuguese, then Arab, then British. Because for a long time they were fighting over Mombasa. Mombasa is an island. And one of the names of Mombasa is Kisiwa cha Vita, which means island of war. People have been fighting over it for centuries.
Probably because I assume it was one of like the closest entry points to land. It was like it was for trading basically. Absolutely,
it has a natural harbor, and yeah, I think for that reason, for trading. That's why the whole coast along Somalia has a coastline that's about 1,000 miles. It's perfect to convert because it's 1,600 kilometers.
Oh, okay.
It's 1,000 miles of coastline, and it's really lucrative for trade. Even with all the political turmoil and stuff, there's always controversy and issues about different countries being interested along that coastline for fishing and trade and charcoal and many other resources. So yeah. So before I go on a tangent, most of the quote-unquote historical sites that are recognized were from outside. Then back to, I told you that the subject of Kenyan culture is a controversial one for me.
Right.
Because Kenya existed since, Kenya as a country existed since, say for the past century.
Since the British drew the lines, basically.
Exactly. Since the British drew the lines. And within Kenya, we have 45 recognized ethnic communities, which basically lived like kingdoms. It's almost like, I'd compare them to, for an outsider, I'm explaining them, I'd compare them to how many people view the Native Americans.
Okay.
From outside, they appear to be a monolith, and it's easy to assume from the way they're presented that the Native Americans who would find as far as high as Canada to those you'd find all over the United States are part of one monolith.
Right, that's the assumption. That's the assumption. That when people hear like Native Americans, absolutely. That, at least when I was younger, that was the assumption I made. Which thankfully they taught in class that is not the case, and then in fact there are many different Native American cultures, tribes, groups, however you want to phrase it.
Absolutely.
So you're saying it's the same thing.
Yeah, so it's the same thing. We have different ethnic communities with distinct cultures and distinct languages. This 45 is just it's not a complete figure because some of these groups have more subgroups.
Right.
And the total number might as well be over 100. So when you speak of Kenyan culture, it's sometimes I feel like it's forced patriotism. Because it's like nationalism. I think or then something else. Our idea of nationalism is different from like the Western idea of nationalism.
Okay. So
yeah.
I think it's my turn to go on a tangent now because I have very strong feelings about nationalism versus patriotism versus all that.
Yeah.
Especially since I have both of my nationalities. And see, the thing is that so I go ahead and give your definition, your differences between Western nationality and what you were going to say, and then I'll continue. But just this is I'm letting myself know that I have a thought and I don't want to lose it. So.
Okay, I just wrote it down and put a star on it. So for nationalism, before let's say up until about 6 or 7 years ago, my idea of nationalism, or as it's more commonly called at home, nation building, was trying to bring people in the country together.
Mm-hmm.
And most of this talk, it had a bit to do with Pan-Africanism, which is the idea of connecting people of similar culture. But nationalism or nation building was, if I could simplify it, it was after independence. You could say that, let's say people in a meeting and they say, okay, the white people have gone and they've left us with a country. How do we build a brand?
Yeah.
And what does it mean to be Kenyan? We're going to come up with a national anthem. We're going to have a national language. Those two actually exist and they work really well. We have a national anthem with 3 verses. We have a national language, Kiswahili, which is I believe it was the lingua franca even before that, because the Swahilis existed along the coast, and Swahili is spoken as far back as in the Congo, in the Democratic Republic of Congo. So I believe people who traded a lot used Swahili anyway as the lingua franca of the region.
Yeah.
So part of nationalism or nation building, more specifically, for us, it's more of building our national brand. Okay, we are Kenyan. This is what we do. This is what we look like. But then the problems become, who are we as Kenyans? Because remember, colonialism was dividing communities and conquering them.
Right.
So now
it was a classic strategy. Yeah.
Yeah. So now these people all together and they're supposed to develop their brand. Now, compared to the Western nationalism and the one with more negative connotations, for us that would be tribalism.
Yes.
And because for us tribalism is within these communities, there's some that have more access to power than others. Though again, it's not the whole communities, but mostly the elites within the community. But during political campaigns, when there's a presidential election or something like that, people tend to, the word is retreat to their tribal cocoons, whereby people go back to their home areas and say, okay, these people are our enemies. I think that's an international strategy of uniting people, showing them who their enemy is, and some of that brings them closer to you and appeals to something in humans.
Yeah.
So
just a few points before I go back to what I was going to mention about nationalism. I think you're absolutely right. And I also think that Kenya is not the only post-colonial country to suffer the same type of a struggle to say, okay, now that we're left with this now divided piece of land, how do we manage it? How do we become whatever they call, like, how do we build an identity for ourselves?
Absolutely, identity.
And on that note, I've been reading a lot of stuff about Indian the Great Partition, India-Pakistan, which has a lot to do with that type of stuff. Anyway, before I go off onto other subjects, I think the way you described nationalism as tribalism was very well put. I would also say, at least within the case of the U.S., nationalism is something which I would argue had more positive connotations in the early days of politicians in the U.S. Right? So the idea that America was founded on the idea that we're separating from Britain because they're a kingdom and we don't like them, and all sorts of details which we won't get into. Yeah. But the idea that we're no longer part of the UK. We are now Americans, and we want our independence. No taxation without representation. And this was all within the idea that we should unite together as one. We are one country, which in the beginning, right? In the beginning, is very similar to when Kenya had to do that.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
But as more and more time, and since America is technically still a young country compared to France, for example, that period of when nationalism was a positive thing, because it was exactly that. It was to unite everybody under the idea that we are all one country with one idea.
Yeah.
I think that started to change when a lot more immigrants and came to the United States.
Uh-huh.
I also think that changed when, especially when civil rights, and this was before civil rights movement.
Uh-huh.
I'm saying when like Civil War actually, not and not Civil War, the Marvel movie.
Yeah. I was like, what?
The American Civil War
Uh-huh.
is really when that started to become very important, because the United States was split in two. It was the Confederates and it was the Union, and they were whoever won essentially established who was going to guide the U.S.
Uh-huh.
And so the Union won, and therefore that they're the ones who guided the U.S. into an age where civil rights was able to happen. Because I guarantee you that if the Confederacy had won, civil rights would probably still. I mean, civil rights is still an issue, no question, but it would be far worse today because it wouldn't have gone nearly as far. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, it's okay.
So anyway, so nowadays, nationalism is the idea that we want to go back to that old time when America was the best, which, arguable. Definitely one of the top economic and political powers.
Yeah, you guys went to the moon.
Yeah.
That's amazing. It's easy to take for granted, but you put man on the moon. That's not something to take lightly.
Yeah. I mean, there's tons of accomplishments which were done because of American ingenuity and brain power.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it had to do with good reasons. Some of it had to do a great bunch of things always had to do with bad things.
Yeah.
But nowadays, right, that idea of nationalism conflicts with patriotism. Patriotism being the idea that we want to continue being united as one country who shares the same ideas of freedom of speech, right to own land, right, all the things within the Constitution. But for everyone and for all types of people, whether they're a majority or a minority. So when nationalism gets brought up in any with any conversation, nationalism within fairly old established government regimes. And so what I mean by that is, of course, there's plenty of great civilizations which have lasted for a millennia or more.
Yeah.
But the current governments which are in place, the ones that are the oldest, have the most difficulty between patriotism and nationalism.
Yeah.
Right?
So, and speaking of patriotism, it brings me back to what I was talking about the negative aspect of tribalism. Yeah, if I could go back slightly.
Yeah.
For us, the issue of tribe is still a contentious matter in Kenyan society today, I'd say. Because the negative aspect of it has led people to... We have had post-election violence more than once. The worst was between 2007 and 2008. Actually, it was between December and January because of the presidential election. Because when we have over 50 ethnic communities, there's some that are bigger, some that have members in the millions.
Right.
Have like 6 million from this community, 5 million from this community. And the political figureheads who represent these different communities sometimes go head to, they either form alliances or go head to head in politics. And like in the 2007 election, Amaluo, it's one of the bigger communities but not the biggest. And the community that has the largest number of members is the Kikuyu. It has about over 6 million.
Ah, okay.
So, and it's easy to appeal to people's sense of tribal belonging during elections.
Yes.
And then the rest of the country tends to take one side or the other. We have allies or opponents.
Yeah.
So during this election, running up to this election, there was a tagline of 41-1 because there was the feeling on the ground that members of this community have held on to power for too long. So the rest of the country has to combine forces and unseat them.
Right.
So we go to elections, and remember, the people in government, the people in government control everything. The electoral commission is not as independent as we'd like it to be. So the people vote peacefully. Everything goes well. That's another thing. People talk about elections in some parts of the world. They say they voted peacefully. That in itself is very telling.
I think the worst thing that happened when I went to go vote was there was no pens, so we had to go into the classroom and take some pens, right? So like, if that's our terrible
election experience,
right? Then I think yeah, you got me beat there, yeah.
So there's a general feeling that this time it's really going to happen. There's opinion polls and people are like, okay, the then president was Mwai Kibaki. And the general feeling was like he's going to lose this time. Then the results starts coming in and they're really head to head with this guy called Raila Odinga. And it really looks like he might be beat. But overnight, there's votes from some parts of the country starts coming in, and sometimes people voted 100% for the president, sometimes more than 100%.
Oh my God.
So, but sometimes people on the other side will say there was jigging on both sides. But the thing was, then when they finally, it took about 5 days. And that was, by that point, they're almost holding the country hostage. Because people are waiting, tensions are rising because of previous experiences during elections in some parts of the country, not the whole country. So, long story short, the president got sworn in at 7 o'clock. It was already dark. The results were announced at 6:30. By 7 p.m. he was being sworn in, which was unusual. And soon after that, there was reports of violent clashes in places where different ethnic communities border each other, communities that had some tension between them. Then some people had to flee to Uganda, and over 1,000 people died. Then after that, there was a campaign for people who are campaigning for peace, saying you have to do away with this idea of tribes, because we had our census in 2009, and between the post-election violence and the census, there was a lot of talk about people saying, I'm not a Luo, I'm not a Kikuyu, I'm not a Kamba, I'm not a Kalenjin, I'm a Kenyan. So there was a lot of push for that. And at the time I was for it. I was partially for it. Like, if tribes are dividing us, what's the point of us sticking to them?
Yeah, I mean...
But on the other hand, so when I was... For us during the census meant some people get their jobs and they go door to door taking details from the head of the household or whoever is there to give the information. So one of the questions was, what's your tribe or what's your ethnic community? And some people say the ethnic community, some people say no. They say I'm a Kenyan.
Yeah.
But some years later, I figured out, or rather, I came to the conclusion that that's the wrong approach to it. We can't deny our heritage just because some people put a bad spin on it. That's not how you go about it. Being proud of where you come from does not necessarily mean you're upset at somebody from being born to a different family. You get me?
Yeah. I mean, it and also on the same, right? It's like, I'm going to try to process it by speaking out loud.
Yeah.
So essentially what you're saying is that, as opposed to saying, yeah, we're all Kenyan.
Yeah.
It's, yeah, I'm proud of being of my certain tribe or my group, my ethnic group, but that doesn't prevent me from also being Kenyan.
Absolutely, and that doesn't make anybody else less of a Kenyan.
Right.
Yeah.
See, now that is a concept that I wish would be applied more liberally in the U.S. Because in many ways, actually, and in France too. So I'll explain.
Yeah.
The idea being that many, we'll start in the U.S. because it is supposed to be technically a country of immigrants. The first immigrants being very forceful immigrants, no question. But in that sense, right, people have, maybe not their tribes necessarily, but they have their groups, they have their clans, which they have developed over years and years of just socializing, interacting with people and whatnot. Which is why, for example, I personally have never even interacted with a gun in my life. When I know other people in the U.S. who are very much into and enjoy going out shooting.
Yeah.
And clearly, you see, I know a lot about this. But right, but that my opinions and my values on life should not prevent me from seeing another American and saying they're also American as well. The challenge being that some people don't want to be inclusive because they want their community, which sounds weird. It's like I don't want to accept others as being American because the way I am is what is supposed to be American, and if they don't follow my American way, then they're not American. You see what I'm saying?
I get you completely.
Okay, which is, for me, it's very frustrating because one of the great things is that when I go abroad, the exposure that I have when I was in my area in Western Massachusetts, while definitely not necessarily the most diverse place ever, it was at least open to diversity, and really you would have people on the college campuses who would come from everywhere. So you would be ready to and you would be socialized in such a way where you can interact with no matter who it is, whether they be from outside the country, inside the country, of East Asian origins, of European origins, of Latin America, right? No matter what region of the world, you should be able to, in my idea, you should be able to socialize and interact with anybody who comes from any part of the world, because as an American, you are a melting pot.
True.
Now, whether that's the reality that everybody wants, I don't know.
Okay. So, yeah, if we can go back to your initial question about what Kenya or what Kenya does with respect to heritage.
Yes. Yeah.
It will still tie in back to this discussion. I also remembered we had something in Nairobi called the Bombers of Kenya. B-O-M-A.
Like
No, like B-O-M-A, then S.
Okay.
Ball, Obama, Massachusetts, Alaska, Siberia.
Okay.
Bombers of Kenya. So it was a place where people celebrated the intangible, and they have a huge auditorium or amphitheater where people from different ethnic communities can prepare their traditional dances and have people come around and sit and watch. And there's also the music festivals, which is mostly for people in schools, in primary school and secondary school, and a section of the presentations that are given there are usually traditional, traditional in origin. But on the flip side, that's my experience. It might be wrong, or it might be different for other people today. But for me, when I was in school, the idea of traditional was associated with backward.
I mean, the
traditional. It was like the colonialists came and they introduced a different way of life. So the traditional is backward. But there's something weird about it, because being cultured is usually considered modern and up to the times. Like,
yes. And to jump on that, right? So this in both France and US, if you are, what is it? Did you say traditional?
Traditional, yeah.
Yeah, if you're traditional, typically, it's associated with backwardism of some kind, where if you're traditional, that means you follow the tradition of whatever, in the U.S., whatever tradition where your country came from, where your origins are from. So, my mother is a traditional Italian mother, right? Whether that's good or bad, I don't know. But right, there's different associations that people put when they say that, and then being cultured means that you have read and that you know things. In France, our entire thing is about being cultured.
Yeah.
Right? at least in the higher ends, but it's also presented like that within the society in general.
Yeah.
If you're not cultured or you don't know how to be cultured, then we're going to have to teach you how to be cultured, right?
And
I had to do a wine. So I don't drink alcohol. I went to wine tastings, and what's great is that I learned that at wine tastings you don't have to drink the alcohol; you can just taste it. And so I did that, but still, even so, it was still weird for the people who were showing me around that I didn't drink alcohol or I didn't know anything about wine in general, because that's something that is a French thing. It's a very cultured thing that if I don't know, I should learn.
It was about cultural appropriation, but I focused largely on the aspect of information. And the traditional is seen as backward. The traditional is usually tradition that has been carried on orally and not written, while cultured are people who get their knowledge from books.
Yeah.
But that discounts the decades or centuries of knowledge that have been accumulated by people before you, if you completely put out the traditional.
Yeah.
Are we on the same page?
Absolutely. I mean, in terms of in terms of how you describe it, yes, because the idea, I'm still blown away at the fact that a lot of people ignore oral culture because they don't understand it. And right, because oftentimes when you hear about, they said something, but they might not follow through on it. It wasn't put into writing. There's a lot of it all has to do with legal stuff.
Yeah.
But culture doesn't go through legal documents. It goes through it's when you interact with people, and that's done orally.
Absolutely. And back to why I think it's becoming ending up having a theme of why I think the idea of Kenyan culture is controversial. We ended up using during that time. I think during that period when they were having that, what I call a meeting to decide what Kenya's brand is, they decided that the Maasai community is going to be our mascot. So,
and it's just from the outside, just so you know, it did seem like the Maasai was the only thing in Kenya that was considered, let's say, like that was super Kenyan. It was exactly as you put it. It was the mascot, and it was very visible from the outside, for me at least.
So their branding was successful in that end, but at the same time, remember, we have an education system that is it was essentially imported from Britain, and we made minor adjustments on it. But it's basically, we imported it from there. It's basically trying to make us into Britons with black skin. And but it also comes with looking down upon the traditional, which means on one hand we want the Maasai, we want to tell the world that we look like the Maasai, but on the other hand we are all trying to put on suits.
Modernize, right?
Yeah, we're all trying to modernize here. We are using this. We are using for this community that decides to resist modernization, and even generally for many people, the idea they look at the Maasai as people who are stuck in the past, and like for a large section of the community, they don't treat the Maasai with the respect they deserve. I'd say they look at them with some disdain. Not just the Maasai, but we look at our own traditions with disdain. We say maybe we come from this community, but I agree, not everything from the past needs to be carried forward. Some things can be done away with. There's like the Luos used to take down the lower 60th as a sign of moving from childhood to adulthood. Some other communities did, and in small pockets still do, female genital mutilation.
Yeah,
and such things should be done away with.
Yeah,
but discounting culture as a whole is tantamount to throwing out the bathwater and the baby, because we get these awesome ideas from the West which are good, but we're throwing away knowledge that our ancestors developed on how to best utilize the environment that we lived in.
Now, I think what I'll do then is I think we'll cap off this entire discussion with an idea which it still sticks with me to this day, and I absolutely love it. And I think we mentioned it last time as well.
Yeah.
But I really do find it great that a lot of some if not many of the on the ground work that is happening with World Heritage, at least, has to do with using the local knowledge to improve on what the work is being done on site.
Yeah.
And the perfect example of this is there was so I visited Hampi in India.
Hampi? How do you spell
it? Hold on. I want to get it right, but it's a simple word, right? Yeah, I was right. HAMPI. That's the World Heritage Site. Now, the village I was in Anagundi, and I had the fortune of interacting with the people that work on the site there, and one of the guys he was restoring a pretty ruined building, but the techniques that they were using in terms of the mortar that they were going to use to fill in the cracks and seal everything up, while they did new research on how to replicate the work that was done, they used the same old-fashioned, right? The traditional techniques of essentially putting fiber, like a natural fiber which is found in the area, into the mortar so that it would essentially become a net within the mortar that they would use. I think it was lime mortar, and then it would make the structure just as strong as it was before, using the same type of materials, without any loss of what was in the past, because they used the same techniques essentially.
Oh, that reminds me of something that was controversial during. Did you take your Schmidt's class on?
I did not.
You did not. Okay, there was this example. It was given by another prof, and I'm not sure if it was he or she who was giving the example of this community in India who preserved this statue by pouring milk on it.
Oh, actually, so that's the thing I saw.
Yeah, and from this professor's standpoint, with Western knowledge and more modern ways of preservation, it seemed like they're doing more harm than good. And you could see that it hurts them even replaying a video that they came with to show us. But so some people in the class were thinking they shouldn't do that and they should allow professionals to, and by professionals they mean people who have studied conservation for years,
right? Preferably
in Europe. Yet, and a section of the class was also thinking, why bother them? That's what they do. That's a ceremony, and it's not doing any harm to the structure. It might be eating it up at a molecular level, but the thing is still standing and it's still serving its purpose within the community.
Right. And if anything were to happen to it, it is not the job of the exterior people essentially to come in and say, no, you can't do that. It's the job of the community to say, okay, now that it's happened, now what is our next step as a community?
Yeah.
Good.
I think from around that time, just to finish off as well.
Yeah.
I think we should not look at heritage as putting a pause button on whatever we find and making it pristine from that moment onwards.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm happy you mentioned it, because it's something that I think more and more heritage professionals realize, but it's something that needs to be spread more and talked about more, because you can't just halt everything and keep it as a museum.
Yeah,
unless it is a museum.
True. So before I forget, greetings from Laura and Samson.
Yes, of course.
In case I forgot to mention it at the beginning.
I have nobody else that can say hello, so it's just me. But that's okay.
So what time do you report to work tomorrow?
I will report to work here bright and early at 9:15. Depends on if I catch the bus or if I walk to the metro station, and if the metro is working fine. But it's easily a 45-minute transit, so it's not bad.
So I'm still looking for work. I was thinking of going in the entrepreneurial direction, but it's a bit challenging in Germany.
Yeah.
The last interview I went, I was so sure I'm getting the job, and I was like, yeah, finally, because it was the second time I went. And the guy has a really either a poor memory or he's face blind, because he asked me the same question a year ago. And I thought I answered it better. But I thought maybe I was a bit too honest about the site, because he asked me what's so exceptional about this part of the country, about this place, and it was, remember the thing that Laura wanted to nominate to the the church, the Felsen Church, the Church on the Rock.
Yeah.
And he asked me what's so unique about this place, and I told him I don't know. I've been in Europe, I've been in Germany for 5 years, and many things are still unique to me. I can't just pinpoint one thing. Then he was like, I mentioned several things, and in the end I mentioned the church. Then he was like, I wanted you to say that. Then I told him I didn't mention the church because it's not that unique to me. I know a similar thing in Ethiopia that's more impressive. Okay. That's built in the rock. So I think I should have held my tongue at that point and said, yeah, I don't know how I missed it.
You say, you know what? I've seen. It would be the other way around, even though you may not believe it, right? You say, I didn't mention the church because I wanted to save it best for last.
Now I know. In case I get a third interview, that's exactly what I'm gonna say.
That's right, and hopefully he doesn't remember who you are.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we can wrap up for now.
Yeah, I think that's good.
Yeah.
And I think also, all right. So I think for the recording we'll say goodbye. And till next time.
Till next time, goodbye. So I'm ending the recording.
Good. Okay.
Have you said goodbye?
Good. All right. Now we can put back the video. All right.